today we are joined by a very special guest. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, hi, I am not Meg, but my name is Erica Lindsay Ayala, to be quite precise and specific. And I'm excited to be here. Got my GalPal Sports shirt on and ready to talk some hockey.
Is that like, we had quite a night last night. We got to listen to you talk about the WNBA, and then we went on to the NWHL draft, and now we're here talking about the NWHL. Is this just a day in the life for Erica?
More or less, yeah, absolutely.
How did the NWHL come into your rotation?
Yeah, so right now, I guess I should probably also say this. I am a freelance multimedia sports journalist. I focus on women's sports, and all of those leagues, of course, are played by women and coached by women most of the time, depending on the league, I guess. More on that later. But
the NBA, we're working on it. We're
working on it. Actually, I got started covering sports period through the NWHL. I love telling this story. I have two sisters, they're twins, and Jessie is out of the three of us, the least athletic by a lot, but she got into hockey. During the Sochi Olympics, watched both American teams pretty closely.
Heartbreaking year.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking year to pick.
That it was tough. Both tournaments were, very dramatic. And there's a drag race right outside my window. So let's see if we can wait them out for just a second. I think. Okay, he's gone. And so my sister Jessie got really into hockey and started doing research about hockey, and that's how she came across the National Women's Hockey League. And, in the deep web found that there was this women's hockey league coming. And as a good big sister and as a sports fan, I wanted to integrate her into sports. I was like, all right, we're going to get the merch. We're going to follow the team. We're going to, wear the colors, and it's going to be a thing. And we're going to do that. And so the first game that we went to was that was when they played in Brooklyn. It was in Aviator. That was the game where the Boston Pride were something like 2 hours late. It was insane. But anyway, that experience, despite the team being late because the bus broke down or some NWHL, legend now, we had such a great time. I enjoyed watching hockey live, which you always hear. It's a great sport to watch live, and it absolutely is. And another thing about that first game, though, is that one of the players that stood out to me was Blake Bolden. And I was like, wow, she's got a nice shot. And then I was like, oh man, I think she's black. I didn't know there were too many black folks playing hockey. And the first player that I happened to notice was black. And so that turned into just following people that write about women's hockey, that talk about women's hockey. And then they were like, well, hey, you seem cool. Come on our podcast or write a story on our blog. And that has now spiraled into a lot of really great opportunities to write about women's sports at a lot of really cool places.
That's awesome. Blake Bolden, amazing player, one of New York State's finest players, has scored many goals on me in the days of my youth. But wow, that's such a way to just immerse yourself in the sport and just be like, well, yeah, of course I want in on this. I'm gonna go all the way. I'm gonna cover this sport.
Yeah, I just went for it. And no one told me no, so I didn't know any better. I was like, I guess this is what people do.
That's how it goes, right?
And then so started going to Sky Blue games. So NWSL, came into, and the first Sky Blue game that I went to was when Brittany Cameron was still on the team. And it was, Alex Morgan was shooting a PK, penalty kick, and Britt saved it point blank but the rebound came right back to Alex. This is right after she won the World Cup, mind you. And then Britt saved it again. And I was right there. It was wild. And I was watching in the beer garden, which is at URSAC. You're right on the field, basically. And it was wild. And I was hooked. And then I did the same thing. I was like, who's doing the writing? Who's doing the podcasting? And then they were like, well, you seem cool. Come and write something and, do this and do that. And I was like, okay, let's have fun.
Like, these people just keep asking me to write things. It's great.
Let's do it.
In addition to your broadcasting work for the NWHL, you do a weekly series on social justice in women's hockey. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this happened during quarantine, and I had been about 6 months into being a freelancer full-time because I come from the nonprofit space. And like I said, my sister, surprise, she's also Black. But, so my Black sister introduced me to hockey where I saw a Black player and I was like, okay, this is what Black people do, I guess. But I soon realized that wasn't necessarily the case. But I also played a sport growing up that was not very... it was pretty homogenous in softball and the culture. You don't really have a lot of people of color. And so I came from that just curious. As I started covering sports, I started talking to Black players, Indigenous players. I guess BIPOC is the term a lot of people use, and Black, Indigenous people of color. And really just not necessarily off the record, but I would ask them questions about their experience, and I would share my experience kind of as a baseline of just curiosity. And I think they realized that I was asking questions that maybe people, not necessarily that they hadn't been asked, but in a way and from a position of curiosity and understanding, and that what they were experiencing, at least from the outside, seemed relatable. And so that had been happening for years. Flash forward to March, and George Floyd was murdered, and that was very public. People saw that on social media, and there was a hockey player, and I'd covered her for years, Allie Thunstrom, who lived in an area that was I guess close to where one of the officers lived who was involved in the death of George Floyd. And so there was a lot of looting. There was a lot of, unfortunately, violence after the murder of George Floyd. And she sent out a tweet that showed concern for her community, but not compassion for people hurting because they saw yet another Black person, a Black man in this case, murdered by law enforcement. And so that led to she and I and a few other people having private conversations, because again, I had started having these conversations about identity, about race. And I could tell that Allie was very, I'm almost tempted to use the word upset. I think she was really trying to come from a place of compassion, and she identified early that that's not what she did, and wanted to find a way back because that was not her intent, but that's how it came across. So I asked her and actually Blake Bolden if they would come on camera and have a conversation with me. Again, people that I'd had conversation with over the years, especially Blake, but I knew that they were having a conversation about what Allie had experienced and, some of the, if we will, clapback that she got for making a statement that, had she thought about it, she probably wouldn't have made or would have cleared up where she was coming from. And they both agreed. And so we had that conversation. And from that conversation, I realized that a lot of us in the hockey space, had been wanting to have that outlet and have real conversations to challenge each other, but also feel supported. And that's not an easy thing to do. We're coming up soon on February, and every person of color in the hockey space is going to be asked about Martin Luther King or Black History Month or what trauma they experienced. And I didn't want that to only be the focus, and I didn't want it only to be the responsibility of BIPOC players in this case to lift that burden, especially because a lot of them had already been talking about this. And so the social justice in now women's sports, it started with women's hockey, but the social justice in women's sports series is really aimed at bringing people to conversation and breaking down things that are, to use a term, racially charged, or that talk about racism, talking about them in a more deep and nuanced way. For example, because a player kneels or because a player doesn't kneel, is that the right question to ask? Thinking about what the WNBA did and their social justice take, and but realizing that in history, Black women have always been at the forefront, but usually white women or white men get the credit for moving movements forward, and how that played into and how the WNBA actually has countered that in the last 4 years. So that's kind of how it came about. So there we go, giving Blake Bolden another shout out. But then also, again, Allie Thunstrom, Liz Knox has been great. Bria Felician and Kelsey Trainer talked some soccer with me, and Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi are those players that have this conversation year round. And Diana Taurasi even said, it's sometimes taboo, or we don't say this publicly to media, even when we are asked, the race question, because we know people don't really want to hear it. And I'm like, well, hey, I know someone who does. So it seemed like the conversations were ready. The conversations that I had been having with players over the years, the conversations that players were having with each other, and of course, the conversation that some, unfortunately not all, but some people throughout North America were having as well.
That's great. Thank you for bringing that into the hockey space, because I think it's definitely needed. It's something we need to have. It's overdue. There was a men's basketball player who I think who brought up a conversation with members of the press that kind of reminded me of the series, and I was like, it's kind of like what Erica's doing.
Yeah, I'm fortunately, I don't follow the NBA too closely, but I do know he was a member of the Minnesota Timberwolves. I almost said the Lynx.
I was going to say Minnesota Lynx, and I was like, that's not right.
No, that's not the right one. But the other one, the boys one. But yeah, so, but to that point, I do know that Minnesota group has been doing a lot of that work in the community. So it was surprising to me to hear the journalist engage, but not surprising at all that a member of a Minnesota basketball team could sit there and say, you know what, I'm happy to share my thoughts, but why don't we have a conversation? Because that mirrors what the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Minnesota Lynx have been doing for the last several years.
Absolutely. I mean, the WNBA is always going first. Let me bring it into hockey. You're like a day one NWHL person. What has it been like watching the league go through this growth?
Yeah, A1 day one. So I started as a fan, like I said, with my sister. So it's been really exciting to see the growth, because I came in from a fan perspective first, because things do change and you think about things a little bit differently and you respond differently when you are a member of the media. So I'm glad I had that first regular season to just be a fan. I think what's important for folks to know is that, man, Aviator literally would shake and rock. That's where the Riveters played when they were the New York Riveters. Their first season, they played at Aviator. And so it's been interesting to see the culture that started in that first season. And then you had Chelsea Piers for the Connecticut Whale. And, those things have changed over time, but there's a nice group of people that have been with the league since the beginning. And I think we're starting to see in this season 6 now that those people have been able to, bring their network, and other personalities and journalists have been able to bring in people. And I think, ironically enough, in some ways, the season where nobody will have access to the games is one of the seasons where I think the NWHL has the most potential to really engage its fan base and journalists who cover hockey across the board.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting seeing all the organizations and the leagues who are coming together and putting in the fan faces for the N-double. Like that's just cool to see that like synergy energy coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. I just today we got a bunch of announcements about fan faces and cutouts. I mean, the Rangers are having their whole, I should say the New York Rangers, not the Texas Rangers, but the New York Rangers hockey team, they're having their entire roster, so 25 cutouts that will support the Connecticut Whale and the Metropolitan now Riveters. But I mean, the Seattle Storm, the 2020 WNBA champions, are having 2 players per NWHL team. So 6 players overall are going to be in the stands, and they are not even remotely close to having a women's hockey team next to them. And Lexi Bender, who is at least from Washington State, is not even playing in the NWHL this season. So the momentum, like I said, has grown so much. And then you have other teams, other men's teams, other women's teams, that the Connecticut Sun and the Connecticut Whale have forged a bond. Sky Blue and the Riveters have forged a bond over time, and now that's on display for everyone to see. It's really exciting.
It's so exciting. It's just gonna be so cool to see. Your Patreon posse may or may not have heard some things.
May or may not have.
N-double, we can neither confirm nor deny. But is there anything you could share about the broadcast details?
Well,
the schedule, of course.
Yeah, we got the schedule today. So what I can say is that the schedule is out. There will be 2 members of the NWHL broadcast teams that fans know and love that will be there, and at least one of them is on this video call right now.
It's not me. I'm not doing that.
I thought you're not.
I'm not prepared.
I thought you were going. That's what they told me. No,
I can't do it, Erica. It has to be you.
I just can't do it, Captain. But no, so yes, I will. It hasn't been announced as of when we're recording this, but it's expected to be announced soon. I will be a part of the broadcast team. So I will be calling games remotely, which is going to be very different for me. But I will be calling the games remotely. I'll be calling the opening game. It's going to be Toronto 6 versus the Riveters. I also have the 4 p.m. game, which is the Boston Pride in Minnesota. And I have about 8 games total, which includes that I will be calling the Isabel Cup semifinals and the final, the Isabel Cup final, for the Twitch audience. So the games, the semifinals and finals will be on NBC Sports, which is extremely exciting. But there will also be a simulcast for international viewers on Twitch, and I will be the analyst for those games.
All right. I see how it is. They didn't want to put you on the NBC Sports. They said this is too much goodness.
It's too much star power. I don't want to overshadow the players.
Sports. You can't have it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's exciting. It's something that's really exciting for me. It's a new way of covering women's hockey. It's going to be potentially a new fan base with Toronto coming in now. And again, me being able to be with those Canadian viewers throughout. So it's exciting. Like I said, there's a lot of that culture and that wholesomeness and that newness from the first season in 2015-16, but it's also nice that while some of that is still around, you see familiar faces, familiar players, even Shannon Doyle, Madison Packer, who will be playing their 6th season for Connecticut and the Riveters respectively. It's also really exciting to have some new blood, and even on the broadcast side, which to me just says that the NWHL in particular, but I would say women's hockey has a lot of potential right now. So if you're watching this and you're not so sure about women's hockey, hey, now's the time to get in. There's so many people doing NWHL 101s, teaching hockey. I mean, I learned a few things about penalties from watching the GalPal Sports video.
Emily learned a lot that day.
Yeah, probably still feeling it. But that's what I'm saying. There's so many opportunities to see this product, which happens to be women's hockey, but find your way. That's exactly what I did when I took my sister to that Riveters game now 6 seasons ago. And, I just encourage everyone to find your own pace. There is a lot of great content creators, journalists, and of course the players themselves. So it's going to be fun.
That's some really good, solid, sage advice. But you're going to be on the call for the very first Toronto 6 game. That's a big deal.
It's kind of a big deal. And of course, a legend in and of her own, the Digit Murphy is coaching that team. And I mean, everything from being there at the beginning for NCAA and the NCAA tournament as we know it now, to expanding CWHL opportunities, to now being with the Toronto 6. I mean, Digit is an amazing pioneer for women's sports, but particularly women's hockey. So I'm really excited to have some of that energy in that first game. And she has a pretty good squad that she's built up as well.
That's going to be really, really exciting to watch. We're pretty excited to see what the Toronto 6 has to offer. They've been killing the social game. Their uniforms are on point. I mean, that's all you need, right? Everything else it all follows after that.
Enough said. Yeah, they're going to be an exciting team, new team on the block, the only expansion team for this year. Apropos that they are the 6th team and they're in, Toronto is known as, what are they, 416? Sometimes
the 616?
646. I don't know.
There are 6s.
There is at least 16. I think it's 416 because 716 is Buffalo, which is another NWHL team. But they are not the 6. No. Buffalo is the Buttes.
Famously not the 6.
Yes. Buffalo, we are not the 6. That's their unofficial name.
Don't you dare call us the 6.
But they're closest to the 6. Like, actually, they're pretty much neighbors. So,
do you, looking at that schedule, are you excited for any particular matchups? Are there?
Well, honestly,
clashes?
I think the first 2 games that I'm calling are probably the most exciting. The Toronto 6, their first game and ever as a franchise, and they are playing in the first game of the season. That is a single site season in Lake Placid at the 1980 rink, Herb Brooks Arena. That's fantastic. Hockey fans are going to be excited about that one. But then the very next game, unfortunately, because of coronavirus, the 2020 Isabel Cup final, which I would have called with my good friend Sam Fryman, because we were the duo that called Boston Pride home games. Mm-hmm. That was at first postponed, but eventually canceled. And you have to remember that last season, for the season 5, the Boston Pride were on an absolute tear, were nearly undefeated until Allie Thunstrom and the Minnesota Whitecaps were able to beat them in Tria Rink in what can only be stated as absolute dramatic fashion. The last 2 goals of that game were both scored, one by Boston, one by Minnesota, within the last minute of the game. Within the last minute of the game. And those were the two teams that were going to the final. And now those two teams play the second game of the end double season. Oh yeah, I'm excited for that one.
Oh, unstoppable force, immovable object, grudge match renewed. Oh.
And it's going to be interesting because Boston's roster, I think, is a little bit more intact from last season as compared to Minnesota's roster.
Oh, really?
But we've also seen a lot of players move teams. Karine Bowie, who is with Buffalo Buttes with the Whitecaps. We've seen Emily Fluke, who was with the Boston Pride, now playing for the Toronto Six. So who knows what we're going to see, but I get to call it. I get to be on the call.
Yeah, that's the thing about this little end double is everything's in one place for 2 weeks. You can sign with whomever.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, just go for it. You know,
like, you want to play for Toronto? Play for Toronto. That's a big deal.
It's kind of like me picking up freelance assignments. Oh, you did this? Yeah, go for it. Knock yourself out.
Go ahead, have fun. For any folks who might be new to the NWHL watching experience, just from like a purely new to watching hockey experience, how would you compare that to watching any other sports that you've covered? Because like I know for me, like I have a much easier time like watching the WNBA now because of watching hockey, like the way they move the ball.
Interesting. So, what I would say, from how the game moves tactically, perhaps, I think hockey is like a fast, confined version in a lot of ways of soccer. And so if you know soccer, I think you can probably pick up on what the hockey community's throwing down on the ice. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's the offside. They love an offside in soccer. Yes, exactly. So, some people are very pretentious about whether you use that last S or not, but, I'll leave that to the folks. But, and again, GalPal Sports has a great video on this, as opposed to it kind of being an arbitrary line. That's kind of a player formed line. Offsides in hockey is that blue line, right? So if you get that, I think also what I really enjoy about hockey is if you know basketball, especially defense on basketball, that there is the weak side defense. And so in hockey, you have near post, which is where the goalie is, and then you have the far post, which is where the goalie can't see. And so, me as someone who loves defense, I love to break down how defense like I would in basketball. So if you know basketball and kind of being able to make those rotations and be able to cover spots that your other teammates can't see, I think that you should be able to follow hockey. There's just ice and blades and sticks and helmets and gloves. But I mean, other than that, it's totally the same as soccer and basketball.
Same thing.
Absolutely same thing.
There are some like walls that you have to avoid.
Oh yeah, I guess and the walls and but other than that, it's absolutely the same.
It's all the same. It's all the same.
It's all the same. But from a viewing perspective, as far as like the experience, what I think has been great about women's hockey is that they've kind of embraced the streaming model. So I don't think that was always necessarily the plan, whether you're talking CWHL, NWHL, or even now the PWHPA, women's hockey at the professional level has pretty much always been streamed
somewhere.
And usually, especially for those that use YouTube, there's a comment box. So actually, my experience watching women's hockey from home integrates really well onto the Twitch platform, which that folks call me auntie, especially in the basketball and in the women's basketball community. Auntie ain't not a thing. Okay, not a thing about nobody's Twitch. I was like, I don't know what that is. But then I had to start calling games on Twitch. But the thing that, again, that small and loving and tight-knit WOHO community has now integrated, and Twitch has the capabilities to have a live chat. And because of the 3-year deal that the NWHL has with Twitch, the league now encourages broadcasters to engage with fans. And so being a fan turned journalist and fan turned broadcaster specifically for hockey, that makes things a lot of fun, because I recognize certain names. We're having a party. They're excited about the NWHL too.
Yes.
We've got fireworks going off for season 6 of the NWHL here in East Harlem. That's how we get down. The party don't stop.
There's no party like an NWHL party.
Yeah, no party like an. I'm just gonna cut those fireworks off for a minute. But yes, it's exciting, and being able to use the software and a lot of the interface that Twitch has, and have a hype train, and now we see some of that happening in the NWSL, and I just think it's great. Yeah, it's so interesting to see the NWSL hop on the Twitch train right after the NWHL has that wonderful season and builds that really great community. We were on the fan side for that season, and we'd see the same folks in the chat, and everyone would just have a good time and share the emoticons, and people were just giving out 1-month subscriptions. Like, that's a good time. It's party in the chat. You get a subscription. Yeah, it was a great time. It was good. It's great. It's been great. And, I'm learning now, and this is all before COVID, but now leagues that have integrated into streaming platforms, especially Twitch, are benefiting from they're positioned, I should say. They're positioned to take what is an absolutely unfortunate situation, which is that we all should be very cautious and be mindful and be thoughtful of how we're engaging in public spaces. They've been able to take that now, and it's not much of a pivot for the players or for the community, because there's already been that engagement with Twitch. So I'm hoping that the NWHL will even take a few more chances and really get experimental with some things now that they know that their entire audience is going to be engaging with their players and with their product through video.
Let's hope. I mean, I'm all for it. Let's go on. Let's be the league of the future.
The league of the future. Yes.
League of the future.
Let's do it. And the way to do that is video. And another thing, actually, through my series and through doing a lot more Zoom chats, is that I have also realized that, just like I didn't know there were a lot of Black people or BIPOC people in the hockey community, that there is an entire community that is feeling as though, we really focus most on able-bodied fans. And able-bodied, and also those who, or I should say, are not really focused on those who are hard of hearing. And again, being video and integrating everything in video, I've also learned that there's a really strong hockey community that wants things to be accessible. And so being able to do things on video has really opened up that world to hockey-loving fans that unfortunately haven't really felt embraced by the hockey community.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no downside to opening your doors to as many people as possible. Like, just let's get everybody in.
Come on in.
Let's make everyone feel happy and welcome inside here.
Absolutely. All up in her.
All up in her.
I mean, it's good times. It's good times. So we'll see what happens. Like I said, there's a lot of opportunity for innovation, and I think the NWHL is a team, and they certainly have a fan base that would embrace that.
Awesome. Speaking of innovation, we've had a few teams that have gotten ownership come in and really do it up for them and kit out the locker rooms, give them really the full 9 yards. Can you speak a bit more on like how do we really get like the investment going in the NWHL?
Well, one of the things I think has been that the NWHL itself has pivoted their governance structure, or it has now a governance structure. Danny Ryland, now Danny Ryland Kearney, was the founder of the NWHL back when they had only 4 teams. Shout out to the Founding Four pod. That's where we get our name. Founding Four. Oh, see, there we go. More fireworks for the Founding Four pod. But Danny Ryland, up until last season, was responsible for the 5 teams at that time in the league. Everything from marketing to payroll was basically her responsibility. And now that the NWHL has moved to a governance model, what you have is you essentially have a representative from each of the 6 teams. Fireworks, more fireworks. This is wild. It never is on and popping.
It's a celebration of the NWHL.
It's a celebration of women's hockey, and I'm here for it. I am totally here for it. But they now have a representative, and so there's one person that sits on the board of governors and then reports to the commissioner, who is now Ty Taminia. And the other value add there when it comes to being able to grow and get more money and investment is that Ty Taminia is very familiar, because of her background in professional baseball, in building out franchises, in building up teams, in creating a solid product and really integrating teams into a community. And so I think what we've already seen is some of that happen. Even with the cutouts, you have some teams that have specific other professional teams that are targeting their market specifically. And so I think that actually can create a lot of excitement. It can create a lot of competition. And if you're someone who is a small business owner, or you're a professional team in a specific market, and you want to make sure you're lifting up that community, that's opportunity now for Boston, for Minnesota, for Buffalo, to have investments that are right there in their community, because a lot of the players do end up, even if for a short time, but a lot of them are located in the market that they play in, which is why they're able to play for that market. So I think the governance model switch, I think having Ty Taminia in, and now Danny Ryland focusing on selling the 4 teams that are still owned by the league. Now it's known as WOHO Partners. Now that's what Danny Ryland is doing. So more of the same, except now she's only doing that, as opposed to trying to sell the teams and franchise the teams and do payroll and do marketing and, liaise with the Players Association. So this hopefully will open up a lot of opportunities. And we've already seen NBC deal. I mean, we're going into year 2 of the Twitch deal. And again, a lot of those local partnerships, I think it's starting to work.
It's almost as if women working in sport only have to do one job, things get done faster.
It's almost as if, right? Not to mention that if we pay women or give them equity, that they will
slow
then
slow down there. This is women's sports.
Whoa, and of course that's a nod to what Anya Packer and her group, particularly with the Players Association, was able to do, where in season 5, they are one of the first women's sports leagues, if not the first that I've ever heard, of having a 50-50 revenue split. So what does that mean? Now these players, in a very real way, have an investment in any new sponsorship. So it's not just, telling a player, oh, well, you have to wear this, sticker on your helmet. because I said so. But, now that player knows, hey, the more stickers or the more opportunities or times that I'm being asked to engage with a brand, that means there's more money coming in. And that revenue split, 50% goes to the league, 50% is funneled through the Players Association, and then essentially it's that equity. And I mean that from like the financial term, but like there's the players have stock and ownership of sorts, and can claim a portion of the 50% of that money that goes directly to players.
Like a good thing.
I think it's a good thing. And in talking to Anya Packer, the only thing that could make that better is to have a proper collective bargaining agreement. And I asked her about what I like to call, her whiteboard ideas. And on that top of her list is really to get that collective bargaining agreement up and running before season 7. So we'll see what happens.
Do you think they're too far away on that, or do you think it'll get done?
I think it's definitely a sprint to get it done for season 7. What I do know, they're
that
charging
race
up
outside.
Exactly, they're revving up the engines to get there.
On it tonight, I have to say.
They're on it. I mean, right? The cues are right there. They're helping with my transition so much. But yeah, Anya is definitely revving up that engine. It's definitely something that she's working on. And how I hear Anya talking about it publicly is that, especially with this new governance model, the Players Association being able to have certain things in place might actually benefit an ownership model, because once an owner comes in and there's certain things already in place, such as how are we going to handle players in the league that are parents, and we have several in the league. And while they're not on every single team, as Anya said, the Boston Pride at one point in time are likely going to want to have protections in place for their players when it comes to those players that are also parents. And so by having that streamlined through a CBA, that's something that even if the Boston Pride team is not responsible for or is not thinking about right now because of who is on their roster, it just helps streamline everything for the owners and certainly for the players to have those type of standards in place, which of course is also good for the players.
Absolutely. And I would hope that with just what's happening in women's soccer in the NWSL, with everyone being so excited to buy teams there, that the founding 4 enterprises could easily find an owner, like no problem.
Here's hoping. We have to be real. There are some dramedies happening in the women's hockey.
I don't know what you're talking about. What is there drama in women's hockey?
What hashtag for the game was a little bit of a pivot, but there's a difference of opinion right now, and I think that what we saw is, and just maybe for really quickly for fans who may not know, the CWHL, Canadian Women's Hockey League, predated the NWHL. The NWHL, started by Danny Ryland, was the first league to offer salaries, whereas the CWHL was more of kind of like a non-profit. It offered the opportunity to play, but not necessarily to get, or not at all, to get paid to play. So uniforms and travel to an extent were taken care of, but you were not compensated. And that changed with the NWHL. Unfortunately, the CWHL, after about 2 seasons, I believe it was, of paying a salary, so they eventually did get there, they folded. And when the CWHL closed its doors, and there's a lot of players going back and forth between now essentially 2 options in between. But what we saw is that national team players in particular, quite honestly and understandably, were fed up with the model of professional women's hockey that existed up to that time in 2018. And those players we're like, hey, we're gonna not play in any North American league, and we're doing it hashtag for the game, for the betterment of the game. We want a sustainable league. We want salaries where this is our job. And all of that makes absolute sense. The difference of opinion is how to go about that. Some players believe that they can do that in the NWHL. And again, that 50-50 rev share, that came right on the heels of the for the game movement. And it's worth noting that. And in some ways, I'm not sure if Anya's ever said this, but just kind of putting things together, I do think, honestly, that the for the game movement was able to get Anya in a position to bargain for that 50-50 rev share, where maybe she wouldn't have had that as quickly without that. So, again, that players taking ownership has moved and escalated women's hockey. But what we do still see is that the overwhelming majority of active national team players from Hockey Canada and USA Hockey have not returned to the NWHL. And they're playing in something that is known as the PWHPA, Professional Women's Hockey Players Association. And that association is doing kind of a showcase model. They now have regions. They have about 5 regions, and players play in those regions. So they don't have team names, and they're not necessarily in the same way that they did when they were with the CWHL. So right now, there's a little bit of a difference of opinion that was very contentious about 2 years ago. I think we're starting to slowly settle into that this is probably going to be the way through the next Winter Olympics in 2022. But we'll see. There is still some bad blood, and that's not necessarily all on the players, although I do think there are some players that are a little more adamant than others. But also, remember I mentioned that culture and that fan base, and how important that fan base is, the lifeblood to women's hockey. And so that has made it difficult, and also has made it confusing for investors or for owners or for brands that are already sponsoring individual athletes. And most of those athletes are national team athletes. So you're likely not going to get an Adidas to sponsor anything that Kendall Coyne Schofield is not supporting, as an example. So that's kind of where we're at. I think that will start to simmer off, as I said, or simmer down. And we'll see, because again, the NWHL and their existence elevated the CWHL. And so women's hockey got better after that. The For the Game movement, I would argue, really pushed for some things that we now see in the NWHL. And so women's hockey got better. And so now it's a matter of what's going to be the next big thing, and what is going to be the next driving force to get women's hockey closer to being paid as full-time professional athletes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought of the For the Game declaration really pushing the envelope for a 50-50 split, and I think that definitely could be something that definitely pushed it over the line. Yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how all of this goes through 2022, because it's like we see that the NWHL does not need national team players to thrive and to continue on, and it's been that way for their entire existence. Like they went through the 2018 year just fine. Yeah, more or less. And there are definitely a lot of mistakes that the NWHL has made. And again, as someone who started as a fan, I felt very strongly about the way that or what the athletes had to endure. And again, it's not to say that it was any different than anywhere else in women's professional hockey, but that's exactly the problem, which again is what the PWHPA is saying right now. You're right. Right now, this isn't any different, but that's also in and of itself a problem. And so there's the difference of opinion. Do we kind of go a gradual incremental step up, which right now at least is the NWHL, or do we hold out and withhold our labor essentially until there's something better that is from inception paying players at a pro salary? Now, also, of course, the problem that the NWHL ran into is that they
had salaries, and then they had to drastically cut those salaries and really haven't risen in salary alone. The 50-50 rev share actually brings them pretty close to what they were paying their players in season 1, if not maybe a little bit above that, especially for top tier players, because it's kind of a tiered system. And then how much you're getting paid in salary depends on how much of that percentage of the 50-50 rev share you get. So that's kind of how they're doing that now. They've been a little more hush-hush about salaries, but I do think what's going to happen is that we're really not going to see much movement. I know a lot of people are hoping that the NHL will step in, but I don't think it's realistic to see any of that movement before, or I should say, we won't see any of that movement until after the next Winter Olympics, because we're getting very close to the period of time where Hockey Canada and USA Hockey are expected to centralize, where they take their entire national team or the player pool that they are going to be picking the national team from, and they place them in a training camp for several weeks. And so after this hockey season in the spring, that's what we're expecting to start seeing. Of course, COVID might throw a lot of that up in the air.
It'd be 2022, I guess.
Maybe. I mean, the 2020 Olympics, Summer Olympics still hasn't happened, so who knows? But it'll be very interesting to see. So between COVID and, again, the expected 2022 games, and I think we're in Beijing, China again. So those things are pretty big factors that will determine. But in the meantime, in between time, the NWHL is having a single site season, which, if I'm going to put this out there, the way the sports are looking, if you're going to play sports at all, the way to do it is to do it single site. We see that the G League is doing that. The NBA did that successfully, and they're not doing that now, and they're not meeting what I would consider success. The WNBA had their bubble season, and they're not set to return to action until the spring, so we'll see what they decide to do. NCAA has no idea what they're doing. We've just become more and more comfortable with positive testing for college-age students. So I don't know. There's a lot going on, and so we just have to wait it out.
Yeah, well, let's hope. I mean, it's too soon, of course, to wonder about 2022 and beyond. But I mean, hopefully all of our favorite sports can get their acts in order for at least next season. It's like we've all seen what works. Just do the thing again.
Just do that. Let's err on the side of safety and sanity. But we'll see.
We'll see. Erica, where can the people find you for more of this wonderful hockey knowledge?
Let's go. You can find Auntie at elindsay08. I'm most active on Twitter, and you alluded to my fantastic Patreon posse. I have been giving little nuggets of what my involvement in the NWHL season will look like over there. So always appreciate the support over there. And we also talked about YouTube. I'm really, as I mentioned, doing my best, especially in these Rona times, to make more video content, and especially to make that accessible. So head over to Sports Talk with Erica Lindsay Ayala, or ELA for short, on YouTube, and you can find the Social Justice in Women's Sports series. I also have created a playlist of NWHL 101 stuff. So GalPal Sports is on there. The Ice Garden is on there. Mike Murphy is on there. And a lot of other great resources for new fans. So give us a follow, and of course subscribe and hit the notifications so you know when we get the next video.
Yeah, it's appointment viewing watching Erica on the YouTube. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you on Twitch. Tell us when.
I can't wait. Like I said, the opening game, the first game of the NWHL season will be on Twitch. That is Saturday, January 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. There are technically 2, and they might actually have to do 3 Twitch channels for the NWHL, so we don't know which one yet, but follow me on social media, follow the NWHL, and you can watch that on their Twitch channels.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Erica.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.